We'll get started then because we're just a couple of minutes behind schedule. My name is Craig Rudman. I'm the Director of Enterprise Agility at Pearson. Pearson is an education company with offices in 70 countries worldwide, a significant development office here in Colombo, approximately 500 people here in Pearson, Lanka. And the office here collaborates with dozens of other offices in Chennai, in London, in Poland, several of them in the United States. So we're really spanning the globe to collaborate and create a portfolio of education products within a company of 35,000 people. So enterprise agility at scale is really the business that I'm in, trying to make sure that as Pearson navigates through product development, teams still are able to be agile. And to me, that means being able to adjust to changing conditions, taking in new information and being able to pivot direction, making sure backlogs are always, that we're always able to reprioritize backlogs at the cadence of development, and yet still maintain alignment throughout the organization to a common strategy and a common set of goals. Product development at Pearson is a portfolio of products. Some of them are brand new products just in their initial stages of research and development. Some are mature products that have been in the market now for several years. Some have one foot in our historical publishing business, a print-based business, maybe with a digital supplement, like a textbook with a digital online supplement. And some of them are innovative, groundbreaking new mobile applications with interactive and social components that really transform the learning experience into something that's truly personalized and dynamic. And so we have this broad portfolio of products that we manage, and so how we navigate that landscape. Some products require taking more risks and navigating uncertainty more than others. Some products are very stable. They have ongoing operations and a business that is bringing in revenue, helping to pay for the innovative new products. And we don't want to mess with that. We want to make sure that revenue stream is preserved and not disrupted by too much change. And so we're navigating a complex portfolio of risk as an investment. And that's part of the Agile story here as well. It means that we have to understand our value streams very well. And I'm going to tell you more about all of these things point by point. But our value streams are, how do we provide our mission? How do we fulfill our mission to the customer? In some cases, the need is for customers who may struggle with learning to get the kind of intervention that they need from an instructor. And so that requires certain kinds of features in certain kinds of products. Other kinds of value propositions involve maybe helping instructors manage large classrooms with perhaps 300 or 400 students. That requires yet another set of products, a different architecture. And so understanding the value stream informs how we think about building a product and how we think about product architecture and design. But no matter the value stream, we put architecture and design first, because we recognize that that unlocking the value of the product means a product that's fit for purpose and that fits well into its environment and business context. So good architecture from both an IT infrastructure perspective and good design in terms of simplicity and applications that can be well managed, teams that can work in high degrees of parallelism, decoupled from one another, and great user experiences. We also have other kinds of design specialists, but I'll say more about that a little bit later. With all of this complexity going on within the organization, we have to be able to optimize workflow. And that's where Agile practices really help us, because Agile practices are about decentralizing decision-making, empowering teams to make the best decision with their local information possible. But if you go too far in that direction, you end up destabilizing the strategic intent of the company. When we first began our Agile transformation, it was 2007 at Pearson. We were smaller. We had about 60 teams at the time, each adopting Agile in a kind of grassroots way. We had an Agile coach coming in and teaching. We had certified Scrum Masters. We had team empowerment, but teams were empowered to create their own product design and to conceive of their own business strategy. And so the company was being pulled in 60 different directions. And so we recognized that we want to bring some alignment to the company without degrading the agility of the company. And so that's the very delicate balance that enterprise agility tries to walk. One of the ways in which we're able to maintain agility at scale is that we rely on fast feedback. Just like in any Agile team needs every 2 weeks, as Mr. Rosa was describing, needs to do those demos and retrospectives and get feedback in rapid cycles so that they have the best information they need in order to continue to iterate. The organization needs that as well, but at scale. And so teams have to report in, and we have to be able to create an integrated view of how whole solutions are evolving, not just the components as they get incrementally built out. So necessarily, that means that we need some kind of framework, some kind of integration mechanism to maintain organizational integrity that way. So we sort of tear a page out of design approaches from software development. We think about, for example, how do we loosely couple teams by providing them interfaces and let them sort of encapsulate the process variability. This team might be a Scrum team, this might be a Kanban team, and yet stay integrated. And that's where lightweight process, good process patterns come in. Mr. Rose spoke of, for example, when you were talking about, well, we all will do requirements, but we might do requirements differently. But there's a requirements integration point, which says that we'll revisit those requirements in 2-week intervals. Those requirements have to be encapsulated in small enough chunks to be able to be iterated on in that way. Within those constraints, feel free to innovate, that sort of idea. Decentralizing decision-making and preserving the integrity of strategy also involves providing teams with the information that they need. So it's kind of a two-way street. Not only do local actions have to roll information up to be consolidated for an executive view, but executive information like vision and roadmap has to be communicated down to the teams so that they have the context, the business context and the architectural context in order to maintain their velocity, maintain the integrity of the system. Building quality in, we'll talk about some of the ways in which we do that. There's many facets to this, from test-driven development, making sure teams have the right skill sets on those cross-functional teams, and some of the engineering practices such as frequent integration and continuous integration and automation of repetitive tasks like deployment tasks. All of these things are part of the mix when it comes to building quality in. And finally, empowering teams. Empowering teams is not just a leadership philosophy. It has some very pragmatic aspects to it. Empowering teams maybe means making sure teams have knowledge. Knowledge is power. Making sure they have the knowledge to make good decisions. Making sure that they have good decision-making frameworks so that they don't have to wait for intervention from outside in order to make decisions. Making sure that they have a voice in shaping the processes and tools and the environment in which they work. And that's what empowerment means. So these are all the aspects of enterprise agility that I'll be talking about for the next 49 minutes. Do you have any observations or questions before I dive in?
Sir, actually, at what level the information coming from the lower level teams will be consolidated? And actually information gets generated in a context. So the people who consolidate information, how do they select which information is important so that they can push it to above?
Sure. So there's a couple of aspects to answering the question. In the first in the first part, there are in this model several levels to consider. The team level, so the team, they have to surface information. Teams try to make all their work visible. They have the daily stand-up, for example, so that they can surface impediments or surface other important information. Maybe if you start to scale up a little bit, 2 teams have to surface information for a scrum of scrums so that they can stay integrated. And then as those teams begin to integrate their work into solutions, you have to raise information up to the solution level so that you know if you're going to meet your release commitments or be able to get some kind of focus testing with the customer and get some feedback in time for the next the next cycle of development, whatever the case may be. So you're at the solution level, and then in a portfolio of solutions, you have to, each one of those, be able to roll information up to the portfolio so that the portfolio knows if they're going to sort of dial up the spending on this side or dial down the spending on that side, maybe move a team from here to there, et cetera, to sort of adjust the pace of development across the landscape of products. And so there's multiple levels to that question. And there's also a kind of content and design authority aspect to the question as well. Product owners, for example, have authority over the backlog prioritization, for example. That might be in the decision-making framework. Product owners at the team level. But a product owner might not be able to make a strategic decision when the product or component or service that's in a distributed, highly integrated platform of services like our products are, that one product owner might be a peer to several product owners in the organization. And so there's another level of content authority at a whole solution level that has to be consulted. And then again at the strategic level. So there's that content authority. Similarly with design and technology, we have the authority at, say, the dev lead level to make a local design decision about, for example, implementing a security framework. But as soon as we want to integrate that into a larger system, there are design implications that maybe the whole system is applying a security framework, which is going to constrain the local team. And now we have a solution architect that has to help to manage those decisions. And so there is hierarchy here. There is governance and decision making. But we have to make it as lightweight and as nimble as the complexity of our environment allows. Yeah. Well, let's take a little bit of a closer look at how these things play out. This is, after all, a case study, and the devil really is in the details. So we want you to understand that at Pearson, we try to apply these principles with lean and agile in mind at all levels? Well, first I want you to understand that we have, I'm sorry if you can't read the small type, but what it's communicating is that we have a portfolio of products that help engage educational scenarios in a variety of ways around the world. And so the dimensions that we have to address are the age of the student. So we have a K through 12 portfolio, a higher ed portfolio, a professional learning portfolio. The pedagogical model, we teach languages differently than we teach economics, and we teach economics differently than we teach math or science. They have different kinds of learning involved. Different geographies. There are different constraints on how education works and flows depending on the social context. Learning in the United Kingdom happens differently than learning in China, for example. There are different models for institutionally as well as culturally. And so the company is navigating this landscape, and as we do, there's all kinds of considerations that come up, sort of non-functional requirements, if you will, legal constraints. In India, there are data privacy laws that are different than, say, the data privacy laws in Poland. And so we'll have different legal constraints about how we manage the data that drives our applications, our products. Design constraints and that may have to do with technology, the technology climate. Mobile usage in the United States is, the patterns of mobile usage are very different than the patterns of mobile usage in South Africa, for example. So we have these different kinds of use cases to consider. Right, so we do try to align our portfolio into these sort of categories, and it's necessarily suboptimal because by organizing according to age, we necessarily sub-optimize according to geography. But when we organize according to geography, we sub-optimize according to age bracket. So these are trade-offs, and there's no perfect solution. But in pre-kindergarten to secondary school, we have a blend of textbooks, software, and mobile applications. A relationship not only with students, but with parents as well when children are very small. Data management systems that are appropriate for young learners. And as students get older, we start to think more in terms of professional training and preparation for the real world. Higher education, of course, is more self-paced. Younger students tend to be more teacher-led. Higher education students are more individualized, self-paced learners. They need to sometimes go much, much deeper into a domain. For example, with young students, it's all right to have a curriculum and content that just simply sets a baseline for, let's say, exam preparation or preparation to go to college. But for higher education, the student is going to lead the content where the student wants to go. And so if the student wants to go very deep into some specialized aspect of microbiology, for example, Pearson has to be ready to help go there with the student. So our approach to content architecture is different in higher education than it is in K through 12. Professional instruction leans heavily on assessment and certification. And so again, different feature sets are called to mind, different design principles. So we have this broad portfolio of products, and that calls for a way in which to manage the diversity of those risks. So we have a thing we call the product life cycle. It's based on lean startup ideas. When an idea is new, our product strategists will take that idea and begin to conceive of hypotheses to say, we think this is a good idea, we think there's a need in the marketplace, we think it's unique in our portfolio compared to other things within our company and compared to our competition. And so they'll create a hypothesis and an early sort of minimum viable product, or at least a proof of concept, or something that will help to validate the value hypothesis. And if that takes root, then an agile team will start to slowly build that product and explore the functional possibilities of that product until it becomes a viable product in the portfolio and can then be sort of past the hump into the growth and sustain mode, where it gets a much higher degree of funding and it's moved into engineering in a different way. So we're managing at scale using lean principles for innovation accounting. There's also portfolio governance that helps us to collect the information as products are progressing in their life cycles, collect the information to a cross-functional board of education business leaders or strategists, technology strategists, finance strategists, et cetera. And this cross-functional view helps us to, on a regular schedule, usually it's once a year, reconsider the mix of investments and adjust the portfolio and give that information to the product engineering and product development teams. In order to make all of this work, we rely heavily on the ideas in the Scaled Agile framework. And this portfolio governance function is represented in the top level. It's the portfolio that decides how should we imagine the value streams and how should we organize the programs below the value streams. That's a portfolio governance decision with the eye on optimizing the flow of work to produce better economic outcomes. So that's the portfolio view. We'll keep thinking about the Scaled Agile framework as we dive into value streams and then program and team execution in just a few minutes. But before I transition, are there any questions about our portfolio management process? I recognize that since we're interested in engineering, the engineering discipline, we really are most interested in the layers below. But having a healthy portfolio management process means that we have a sustainable business and that engineering teams have the information that they need to make good design decisions and good implementation decisions. So even if we're not directly involved in it, it affects us very deeply and has to be healthy within the organization. And it has to be plugged in, integrated well with our engineering practices. Those engineering practices begin to take root at the value stream level, the process of creating, producing, and delivering a product or service to the market. And the value stream takes all of the operational capabilities of the organization, puts them together end to end to create value for the customer. In a way, you could say the customer, by interacting with the product or by requesting, by placing orders for a product or by requesting features from a product, like by clicking on their mobile application or whatever, is pulling value out of the company. And that pull model sometimes produces the results the customer needs. But when there's a gap, either the customer is requesting an enhancement or a new set of features or a new service that we don't currently provide, or whether that's generated internally just through the strategic process of strategy and ideation, wherever that new value proposition comes from, it drives, I'll just skip to this section here, it drives initiatives into the program structure to be realized as changes to the value stream. So we have an integration pattern here to take information out of the strategic portfolio and begin to map it to backlogs in product or solution development. Back at the Scaled Agile framework, these backlogs can be seen, I'll use my pointer here. These backlogs can be seen here and here and here in an integrated backlog system we'll talk about a little bit more. But the idea is that the investment portfolio is driving changes into the value stream backlog. The Scaled Agile framework then helps take this value proposition and helps us integrate programs and teams to deliver a change into the value stream. That's the scope of the Scaled Agile framework inside of this system. And here's an example of what that value stream and program integration framework might look like. We have a product called Revel, and it's putting authoring capabilities and enrichment capabilities, assessment, e-reader, search, mobile, and other capabilities together into an integrated solution. This organizational model helps us to create the right context for teams to operate within. The context being a system context, like a blueprint or some other kind of solution design context, as well as a business context. This is our vision, this is our roadmap, these are the 10 features this year that we're trying to get to the marketplace. We hope that the result will be, 100,000 in new registrations or whatever the case, whatever the business drivers are. That information context is essential so that teams can do good architecture and design that's fit for purpose. Architecture and design lives throughout the framework. At the portfolio level, enterprise architects participate because they drive strategy from a technology perspective. For example, one of the initiatives that came through recently was through an analysis of our AWS spend that we just decided, we were using AWS environments, AWS provisioned environments fairly inefficiently. There's a lot of waste. And if we could get a handle on that and use them more efficiently, we could save X numbers of dollars per year. And so that initiative then what resulted in, for example, a containerization and virtualization strategy that lets us use environments on demand and really reduce the amount of unutilized and yet paid for AWS time, right? So there's a technology driving a business case into the portfolio to be realized as an initiative for engineering teams in that case. At the value stream level, solution architects might be considering bindings that, for example, manage state or manage transactions or help to optimize the performance of an overall solution. Those solution architects are important team members to help guide the several agile teams in creating a cohesive solution. And so we need an engagement model that lets those solution architects know who to talk to and know when their planning ceremonies are, perhaps attend their demos or their code reviews, and be able to, if the teams are struggling to apply the architecture, provide them hands-on mentoring to be able to do so. So that's part of the engagement model at the value stream. At the program level, we have domain architects, experts in, for example, search technologies or in API development or a particular education domain like assessment activities. And that domain architect will help with the design and technical approach to building that component or that capability. And at the team level, it's the development teams that validate the architecture. Architecture is, after all, just a hypothesis of a design that once it's, that could be invalidated through implementation. And so good communication between teams and architects helps to evolve the architecture. In our domain, architecture has many faces. Besides application architecture, we've got information security and performance engineering and UX, learning design, efficacy and research, which goes to the heart about how we judge whether or not our products are a success. This efficacy model helps us measure in the marketplace whether or not the education products are actually helping improve the lives of learners. And so that requires instrumentation and data design to be built into the products so that we can take those measurements and evaluate the products in the marketplace. Data science helps us to conceive of the algorithms that help us understand how people learn and understand, of course, the demographics of our students and all kinds of things like that. So they help us think about business intelligence as well as helping design products. And then I already said enough about content architecture, simply that in a publishing company, how you compose or decompose curriculum into servable chunks is content architecture. So that's the role of architecture and design. And of course, we could say so much more about it. Design is an important mindset as well for a product company, and it determines how we engage. It helps us to determine how we engage the customer in ideation of new products. But there's so much I could say, but I'm going to go on to optimizing workflow. From the Scaled Agile framework and from the principles of product development flow, Donald Reinertson's work, we get cadence and synchronization. It really kind of comes from lean manufacturing, this idea that under conditions of high variability, you need to create predictability in your production process. Well, in this case, our production process is software engineering, and the variability might be in the different sizes of stories that come through our backlog. Some are small and simple, some are big and hairy and complex, and a wide degree of variability can throw an agile team into a kind of destabilized state because their velocity might be impacted, and the predictability of that team might be the consequence. And so by providing a regular cadence of planning, you end up giving basically a denominator to the velocity equation, if you want to think about it that way. We do X number of story points per sprint. The denominator is the 2-week sprint in this case. Now, what that means in practical terms is that you're sacrificing some utilization in order to absorb that variability. So a good Agile team knows that they don't want to overcommit. It's better to undercommit and be a predictable Agile team, let's say take on 70 points and deliver it reliably, than to always say, than to take on 100 points but always only deliver 80. That kind of team is always sort of, the perception is that they're underperforming, and the negotiation space is unstable. With the product owner, the idea that there's a certain amount of work still left on the table. What are we going to do with that? Many teams will just roll it over into the next sprint, but that prevents the product owner from reordering the backlog, and so you're now into this kind of unstable anti-agile pattern, and we don't want to do that. So applying cadence means we think we can do this much work in the quarter, and so we'll plan to about this much work, knowing that we have to absorb some variability, and that lets the teams be successful. There's all kinds of guidance the Scaled Agile framework gives us for doing that. But the idea is there. And then we have these nested intervals. The team plans on a sprintly cadence and then comes together at the quarter to sort of resynchronize with the enterprise context. So for 6 sprints, the team is acting very locally, but then stops and sort of resynchronizes with the organizational context. And that gives us the kind of touch points that we need to be able to maintain that alignment without the constant interference and reporting that some organizations go through. We're talking about optimizing workflow, and so managing WIP is an important part of managing workflow. It's true at the team level, it's also true at the organizational level. So making sure that there isn't too much work in progress helps to create a sort of forcing function that teams will finish existing work before taking on new work. And that helps us to create better incrementalism in our products. It creates better integration points and visibility into solutions. But and all of this requires good information. And one of the things that we found was that Jira didn't provide us good information at scale. Each team had their own backlog and maybe their own special flavor of being agile. It was hard to sort of consolidate that information into something meaningful. So we had to develop a couple plugins for Atlassian Jira and come up with a road mapping view and a dependency graph view. It helps us to see the work that's in planning or in progress and have real-time situational awareness on the state of that work. Is it, in the backlog, or is it actually moved into development? Is it blocked, or is it flowing freely? We have, for example, do people use Jira Agile here in the room? You know Jira Agile? Well, Jira Agile has, at the story level, a little flag, right? You can flag a story as being blocked. Well, that's a really important signal in this noise. That's a really important signal in this system. So when that flag is set to blocked, it shows up as, I'll just use this example, it shows up as red on our dependency graph. Hey, there's a blocked story somewhere in this work breakdown structure, if I can use that phrase. There's a blocked story there. Is that being attended to? Just giving it the visibility helps to make sure that things are managed well and don't sit in a waiting state for too long. The program roadmaps just give us a time-based view of our plan of intent. And then as dates for what we think we're going to work on start to come up, the teams are able to commit to that work, pulling it into scope, and we see that work go from a light blue to being green, meaning it's committed. If we put a blue diamond on the plan and the time and the red line, which represents now, if that blue diamond gets closer and closer and closer to now, we can say, hey, is anybody going to pick this work up, or do we have to replan our expectations as to when this work is going to be delivered? And so in a very lightweight fashion, we're able to anticipate upcoming work and communicate expectations with teams. All of it in Jira, our single source of truth. Now, it's not perfect yet. We still have some teams using some spreadsheets and things like that to maintain some of their information. But our goal is ultimately a single source of truth so that everybody can see the work, no matter what role they're in or what level of the organization they're in. It's all just transparent, laid bare for everybody to see. That's our goal. Alignment. We speak a lot about alignment and how important maintaining alignment is at scale. And for this, we rely on our integrated backlog model, which essentially helps us work through engineering problems. What is it that we want to do in the marketplace? What's the value proposition is the investment question. How can we conceive of solving that problem is maybe the feature question. When I was a developer, I remember many times working with the business side, and the developer's mantra was, tell us what you want, not how to build it. That was our mantra all the time. And so features are really about what we want to build, but not exactly how to build it. Capabilities are how to build it. We take a look at a feature and we say, well, if we were to do it X, Y, and Z, it's going to mean a change to the X capability. We can use the Y capability as it is today. We're going to have to build a Z capability. But if we do that, we can realize that feature. So what ends up happening is there's the capability development that happens, and then some feature binding development that happens. In a perfect world, the same team does all of that work so that it's rapid and holistic. But sometimes it's not the perfect world, and we distribute that work across multiple teams. In any event, we can see the work, we can see the features traced to the capabilities, and we can see the capabilities and features both get broken down into epics and stories. And so we see the work as it happens throughout the engineering organization. Prioritizing those backlogs is really important too. So we use the weighted shortest job first algorithm that's proposed by Donald Reinertson and built into the Scaled Agile framework. And that essentially helps us to ensure that the most value is delivered with the least effort. That's basically what that is. Cost of delay over effort, or it's like a value over effort. And we want the most value with the least effort. And so if we give this prioritization mechanisms to all the teams, and they're all using it, then we know that they're doing economic prioritization rather than order of precedence prioritization or first in, first out queues or whatever the case may be. We know that they're basing their decisions on economics instead. Fast feedback. Does everybody agree that fast feedback is necessary for agility? I certainly think so. And there are a lot of ways to get that. I'll just talk of a few. Notifications, of course, is important. So this goes a bit to our tooling. We always try to do the simplest thing possible. We think that at scale, it's even more important to keep it simple. You know, leaving teams alone to behave as teams is one of our design principles. But somehow integrating those teams into our information context is the problem we're trying to solve. And so automating notification of team-level events, just like that flag, the blocked flag I was telling you about, it's that kind of thing that we try to do so that we get real-time, fact-based information about the flow of work. Now, some of these things are provided, like you can watch an issue in Jira. If you're a stakeholder, you can see when that issue is moving through the workflow. So you're participating in the development of that story, let's say, by watching the story and then participating in the conversation, maybe in a HIP chat room that's dedicated to that issue. Setting notification event handlers in Jira. So, for example, when we have a field that we add to features, capabilities, and epics, beyond being flagged as blocked, we also have an amber and green and red status indicator. We assume it's green, so I just lied to you. Let me tell the truth. It's amber and red are the two statuses. The no status, just we assume it's green. Anyway, so we have this field, amber and red, that we give to people just in case they want to raise visibility of a particular work item. So if they flip the flag to flip the status to amber or red, we can instrument Jira to send an email automatically or to open up a HIP chat room automatically or whatever the case may be to begin to bring attention to that issue. Notifications happen also with our automated build and test environments. When a test fails, a notification is sent. When a build fails, Jenkins sends a notification. And within the applications themselves, we instrument them to do sanity checks and heartbeats, effectively simply communicating their status to a dashboard and alerting operations in the event of a failure. So it's all of these things taken together that helps us to manage or lead with a lightweight touch and let teams sort of self-govern, and yet still create the information awareness that we need. Continuous integration, an important element of fast feedback. You break it, you fix it is our mantra, and we have a commitment to a DevOps culture so that teams are responsible for their own deployments and ensuring that the code is fit for purpose, the product is fit for purpose in production. At scale, eventually that development team is going to back away, and there's going to be an operations team that is dedicated, customer service reps and the whole thing. But the team is very actively participating in standing new functionality up in production. And of course, demos. That's no surprise. Product development teams do demos to get feedback. Dashboards, also the red, amber, green status, it goes somewhere, and it goes to our dashboards so that our program management folks can keep an eye on things, and the system itself can learn, ultimately trying to get that information back up to the portfolio so that we can dial those finance knobs if necessary. Quickly, trying to meet my goal of 13 more minutes. I spoke of content authority already to help make decisions, right? Content authority and design authority. So I'm going to breeze past these and buy myself back some time. Building quality in. Building quality in is a mindset first and foremost, as well as a set of engineering practices. We begin with lean thinking, that stop the line mentality that says if you break it, you fix it. Anybody can stop the line and say, I think that this design is flawed, or I think that this implementation is risky. If at any time we find defects, we try to fix them in the same iteration that they're found. We have two classifications for defects in our Jira implementation, bug and defect. And for us, the distinction is that a defect, it's a subtask type, and it basically stops us from being able to close a story if the team has attached any defects subtask to the story. And it helps. And then the bug issue type is for any problems found after the team has passed along their code. If we should happen to find a bug, it just comes back to their backlogs as a new issue. A lot of attention to standardizing our delivery pipelines and the tech stack on which teams do it. Integrating HipChat and Bitbucket and Jenkins and Docker and Amazon Web Services and a host of other mostly open source approaches to infrastructure as code. We are able to automate deployment pipelines and spread those practices one team at a time through the organization. Our goal is, at least for our next generation products, that every team follows the same deployment pipeline practice. But deployment pipelines only work if you have good rules about how to promote code through the pipeline. And so we like the safe, scaled definition of done for what it means to actually be ready for the customer. Code's complete at the team increment. Product owner has accepted the story. The necessary reviews and documentation steps are taken. The unit tests are passed. The NFRs are met. It's done. We can check it in. We can even merge the code. The second step is that we build an increment of the system and subject it to the smoke and regression testings, the functional tests to make sure it passes, the integration tests to make sure we have a working system. And then solution increment gets tested to ensure that it's actually fit for purpose, that we have user acceptance testing at that level, or other kind of integration testings that we couldn't perform earlier. Security is one of those, for example. There's a specialized environment for that. Is then the idea that the customer themselves are ready to receive the new functionality. So as long as we've done the right amount of change management and communication, if it's a significant change, training our customer service staff, making sure that they're aware of the changes so that they can support any problems that come through, etc. Even with all of this rigor, we hope to be able to automate most of it and make most deployments within 60 minutes. To support the improvement and discipline of engineering teams, we have established an engineering community of practice. And so anybody is free to participate and help to define what it means to be a disciplined engineering team. And so we have a community of people helping to identify improvement priorities and approaches. And finally, empowering teams. Teams we feel are the engine of value creation. And so it's important for us to understand what healthy teams look like. And here we rely on having good team level coaches. The scrum masters or project managers are also team coaches. They're there to help ensure that we have healthy teams. Teams that are accountable to one another, respectful of one another, supportive, and always learning and striving for team excellence. And so we have a bit of a formalized view that the team has to have a complementary set of skills, and in other words, not too much dependency on outside entities to get the work done, but able to do most work as a team by themselves. Committed to a common purpose, and that really comes from the mission, the vision, the roadmap, and the backlog. Performance goals, and so the team has certain performance indicators like their predictability, their velocity perhaps, quality indicators, et cetera, that they monitor themselves in order to ensure that they're paying attention just to the engineering basics. And then an approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Do they have a common set of operating rules as a team? If they're following Scrum, do they do so with discipline? If they're following Kanban, are they applying WIP limits and doing so with discipline, etc.? Teams we like to call our work commitment driven, meaning teams commit to increments of work. They pull it into scope, 2 weeks at a time or 1 quarter at a time, depending on the level of abstraction we're talking about. Teams are committing to pulling the work through. And teams are empowered to say no. That work is either not ready for us, the requirements aren't well defined, there's too much design stuff that we have to work through for us to be successful taking that on within a 2-week sprint, let's say. Or we'll take half of that work on because there's a lot of learning we have to do in order to do these new things. And so what you're asking for is too much. So we'll take half of it and we'll spend the other half learning. And that's the velocity at which we're going to pull work through the system. And so teams help to set the pace of the flow throughout the organization, throughout the enterprise. And it's part of my job as a director of enterprise agility to make sure that that's done in a healthy way and that the teams are empowered to say no and to pull, and that the leadership has the right mindset to recognize that this is good for the organization. And communities of practice are the last thing I'll say today, this idea that everybody can participate in, as I said on an earlier slide, defining what it means to be a disciplined engineering team, defining what it means to be agile, defining how we should use JIRA. It's a community-based effort to surface any issues, centralize them into the enterprise agility team, and then do something with them in terms of a discrete, actionable thing. So I sort of took you on a case study of how Pearson navigates this space of enterprise agility, which is it's a portfolio management thing, it's a project management thing, it's an engineering and quality thing, it's definitely an agile and lean thing, and we recognize that if you fail to do any of these things well, it might mean that the system itself isn't functioning optimally. And so once, I'll take it back to the beginning, enterprise agility for us means a system in which teams can thrive, an organization or environment in which teams can thrive and yet still remain integrated and aligned to a common purpose. So I've got still some time for questions. I know I spilled a lot on you. Thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions for me?
So you talked about your products now. You have teams across globe, right?
Yes, indeed.
So is there challenges when you are implementing these concepts across multiple?
There are lots of challenges, and every single one of them are special. Yes, indeed. So we might have a team in San Francisco, but the product owner in Boston, and the work of the San Francisco team might also integrate with the team's work in Sri Lanka to create a... So of course the special challenges are time zone differences and the speed of communication. A team can only be as agile as the flow of information, as the rate of information flow, right? And so each team has got to solve for that problem themselves. And of course, the ultimate solution is to say, let's eliminate the distribution of this team somehow. And we've had, for example, in one case, a product owner willing to relocate so that the team could be co-located. Or we simply have to do some knowledge transfer or empowerment and grow a product owner, say, in San Francisco. But we don't. But because of the nature of specialized knowledge, that's not always the case. It takes time and investment to get to those optimum situations. And so we're comfortable with the fact that we have to sub-optimize sometimes. And we try to encourage teams to maintain respect for one another. So if it's time zone sharing, that they come to a mutual agreement about what the time zone agreements are, and strategize about how to do that sustainably. So, for example, it's not fair to have the person in one time zone of the world be up at night every day. But is it sustainable that we could, at least once a week, have a high bandwidth information sharing session once a week, and then sort of normalize for the rest of the week, and be able to sort of think about strategies like that? But I won't deny the problems are there, and they're real, and they're difficult, and the solutions are always suboptimal.
Yeah, could you please share your experience with these big room planning sessions in SAFE? And,
yes, indeed.
How do you see that happening with the offshore teams?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we try to stay focused on what the goal is, right? The goal is resynchronizing teams to a shared objective, engaging those teams in making the commitment so that we can define demand and demand and capacity balance, and surfacing risks and having a good conversation about those. That's what SAFE PI planning is all about. And we've seen various approaches, big room planning in 2 locations with a high bandwidth Google Hangout or something connecting the two. We've seen just instead of taking 2 days, taking 3 days and letting the sort of information kind of flow back and forth to be able to be reconciled. We've seen it done by proxy, where the teams come together just as a small committee, not the whole team, so it's not big room anymore, but they come up with a plan, and then they go back to the teams, and they validate with the teams, and then they reconcile. Nothing really is as good as getting everybody together in a room with physical flip charts and such, because there's just so much information that's visual and that's conversational in that situation. So nothing can replace that. But we get by okay with these suboptimal big room scenarios.
How about the time zone? How do you work with that?
Right. Right. Well, as I say, so what you'll do is you'll have the big room planning U.S., and then you'll have an overlap, and you'll share information at that point, and then you'll do the big room planning, say Sri Lanka, and then come the next day, you'll share the information back and forth, and then the management team will decide what the go-ahead plan is for reconciling this. Maybe even just break it up and have the teams kind of crowdsource it. Again, it's a suboptimal plan. And for us, in the face of uncertainty, which is really what's at stake here, the greater the uncertainty, the more we have to lower the capacity of the teams and try to give them time during execution to absorb some of that uncertainty. And it just means understanding all of those dynamics and adopting a leadership mindset to it. All the while then collecting information so we have a really solid business case to our CIO, for example, that, hey, distributing teams around the globe is suboptimal, there's a better way. But we need facts to be able to win that argument because it's so compelling. The CIO is saying, look at how much money we're saving is the argument, and we can say, look at how much money you're wasting because of all the delay and bad and missing requirements that results. Well, thank you very much. I hope that you've enjoyed and have been interested in what I have to say. I know that being lectured at for an hour isn't always fun, but thank you for listening. I appreciate it.